Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Happy to have you here this afternoon, evening. We are today going to be talking about AI proofing student learning, tools for fostering authentic science thinking when using OpenSciEd. My name is Sarah Delaney, and I'm Senior Director of Operations for OpenSciEd, and I'm here with two wonderful colleagues, Tiffany and Daniel, who are going to help me watch the chat and answer questions, and I'm grateful for their participation and for joining me today. And we're going to share in the chat this link to a folder which has the slides to this webinar and then also the webinar that we did last week on teacher practice, so AI use with teacher practice. And we'll go ahead and get started here. So we're going to jump right off and have you start where we're all wanting to start with what are our greatest concerns. So if you're able to type in the chat, go ahead and share in the chat what are your 3 top concerns when it comes to AI and student use. If you needed to do a little short description, you can. If you just want to name them, that's fine too, but we'll take a moment. If you're able to share in the chat, would love to have you do that. And we'll hear your top 3 concerns about student use of AI. Barbara said cheat GTP, which I haven't heard that before, but wonderful, thanks. So lots of people coming in, and Tiffany shared the folder with the link there. So we'll take a moment more for people to share and read one another's concerns. And if you can't see the chat, I'll say there's some talk about cheating, loss of critical thinking skills, some dependency concerns, that we're going to skip over thinking and cut right to the answers, which is exactly what we're moving away from with these standards. So alignment here with this. We have, it's hard to get a sense yourself as an educator if things are working or not, if the students are all just going and plugging it into AI. So that's real too. Misinformation, and then we're losing our own voices because we're going to start writing like the same weird AI voices. That's a interesting and true concern there. And then don't build up the muscles. Okay, so continue. This is a safe place for you to vent your concerns. I've been thinking about these concerns as we've been preparing for this webinar and as we've been using AI ourselves and talking about what that looks like in our program. For today's webinar, am lumping all of the concerns into 5 main categories. So one category is products of learning, one is process of learning, quality of information, fairness of opportunity, and then safety and responsibility of use. And I think many of the concerns I saw fit into one of these bullets, and we're going to unpack all of them and talk about what can we do about it. But keep paying attention and note if there's a concern that doesn't fit in here at the end when we go through all these. I'd love to talk about like what did we miss and what should we be thinking about that wasn't on our radar. So here's what our plan is today. Short introduction about OpenSciEd. Then we're going to do a little AI 101. If you came last week, you can tune out for a few minutes, but I want to make sure that everyone's kind of starting on the same page with this and has some solid foundation so that we can have informed conversations later on. And then we're going to jump into those concerns and kind of unpack each of them. So OpenSciEd, we are an innovative nonprofit organization. We bring together world-class curriculum developers, education experts, science state administrators, teachers, philanthropic organizations, and we work through collaboration. And we create free, high-quality NGSS-aligned materials and professional learning. And we have AI experts in our world, but we are not them. So it's important to disclaim that right now, that we're sharing this webinar, but we are not AI experts. Today is an introduction. It's not a technical training. And I'll give you a list of experts you can reach out to if you feel like you need to dive in more. The second disclaimer is AI is evolving rapidly. So guidance that I'm sharing today might change as research and tools emerge, and we are still figuring out what does this mean for students and developmental stages and how we're learning. There's so much unknown, and at the same time, the target is always moving because AI is moving and changing all the time. So just want to note that. And then for everything, I want to make sure that you're checking your local policies first. We want to make sure that you're consulting your district policies and your technology leaders before you're doing anything we talk about or using any of the tools or trying out any of the things we talk about today. You want to make sure you're covering your butt. And then using trusted sources is always important. And that is sometimes hard to do because there's so much information out there. But here are some. So here, if you are at the end of this webinar or throughout this webinar wanting to know more from an expert, these are 6 organizations that have vetted education-focused resources, and they're trustworthy sources, so you can go check them out. I've actually pulled a lot of what I was pulling on for this webinar from the collection here on the slide. So if you need to go deeper, I would encourage you to do that. So while we aren't experts in AI tools, we've been doing a lot of learning, but we are experts in our curriculum. And also we know a lot about how students learn with our curriculum. So today, what we're going to really focus on today is this overlap. Like, what is the productive overlap? And what is disruptive too? Like, what is going to get in the way of the student learning when we think about AI tools? So we're really going to think about that overlap. And that's why I think this is a productive conversation to have with others that know the OpenSciEd materials. So AI 101, if you haven't been paying attention, there's this thing called AI. What is it? It's a great question. So AI stands for artificial intelligence. And this is a broad definition. AI refers to programs, machines that simulate tasks that typically require human intelligence. So things like recognizing patterns, making predictions, generating content, and that is broad, but it's not new. So AI has been around for a long time, for decades, and it's mostly been behind the scenes. So in the 1950s, that's where it started, the field started, and it was focused on rules and logic. In the 80s, machine learning emerges, and then we had computers trained on data. So this is when we have early adaptive learning systems and recommendation engines. And then the 2000s, we have deep learning, which is mimicking neural networks inspired by the brain. And we have speech recognition and image classification. We're checking to see if we're robots or not by looking for the motorcycles and the bridges and all of those things. So lots of things happened. So what's different now? Like, why is it in every single news story that you see, and is it everywhere? So today, when people are talking about AI, we're referring to generative AI. And this is something that has been in the 2020s. And it is where we create new content like text, images, audio, video, and it's powered by large language models, which are trained on massive data sets. And the products of this, the outputs, they feel conversational and human-like. And in many ways, that's kind of the interesting power and why this has kind of taken it by storm is this conversational, relational feeling that you get when you're engaging with generative AI. The large language models are important to kind of pay attention to because this is sort of the black box of AI and kind of leads into the mystery of how it works and the lack of transparency of how it works. So these large language models are trained on massive data sets of text from books, websites, and basically the entire internet. So these models read the entire internet, and then they learn patterns and relationships between words and phrases and concepts, and they can generate text by predicting the most likely next word in a sequence. And this feels crazy when you're seeing the output that you get, that it's done just like by predicting the most likely next word in a sequence. Seems like it would never create the complexity of what you're reading, but that's basically how it works. And I'm not an expert, so you can go learn more about this if you want to dive deep into the large language models. Some common AI tools, GPT, Gemini, Claude, Copilot, these are all general purpose chatbots. You'll also see any website, application, anywhere you look now has some sort of AI built into it. And you'll see the sparkle emoji as a way of dictating that it has some use of AI. So at the bottom of Zoom, you'll see the little sparkle, and you can see that companies have woven that into their icons and their symbols so that you know that AI is being used. So the strengths and limitations, this is important to know when you're thinking about it. AI is really good at speeding up repetitive tasks, summarizing and organizing information, recognizing patterns, and gathering information from the internet. Many people use it instead of Google. Like, this is a way that I do my search engine is from chat instead of Google. And it's also good at brainstorming and having a dialogue, drawing on resources. So those are strengths. There's also limitations. So it's not good at authentic sense making. It doesn't know what's important and what's not important and how the pieces fit together. It's just predicting the next thing and making guesses. It's not good at math or logic. So it will predict numbers and steps from text patterns, not from actual calculations. So it makes a lot of errors when it comes to mathematics and charts and things like that. And it's not good at interpreting images or videos. Its big thing here is it's also big limitation. It's only as good as the data source. So if there is no strong data source or there's misinformation out there about something, then the output of AI will also have that misinformation. So it's really important to know that it's only as good as the data source. So if the data source is limited, or if there's problems in that data source, then it will create products that have that same thing, the biases, the lack of accuracy, things like that. Once again, if you want to dive deeper, I encourage you to go one of these experts and learn more about this. But we're going to go ahead and jump to our topic today about student learning. That was your brief AI 101. And I'm going to start with the good news because we had all these concerns in the chat, lots of concerns. But I'm going to start with the good news, which is the OpenSciEd instructional model and the curriculum have many design features that help make it AI proof or at least AI resistant. So why and how does this happen? One is our materials have student discussion as the core of learning. That's the primary thing that happens in the classroom. And this learning advances through rich classroom discussions where students build on one another's ideas. And what's great about that is that sense making is happening in the moment, and it's not something that AI can replicate or replace or even refer to. That's something precious that's happening in your classroom that is unique to your classroom and your students. So there's no way that it can be drawn on or cheated. There's no cheating that authentic discussion that happened in your classroom. So that's a huge, valuable thing. Another piece is that we use modeling as a visible record of thinking. So students develop and revise models to explain phenomena, and these evolving artifacts show their reasoning process, not a polished product. So OpenSciEd is all about how do we build our understanding over time by layering on more and more evidence, by layering on more understanding. So it's really this path, this process that's so valuable. And AI cannot generate that. You cannot have AI generate the evolution of that understanding over time. So that's protected as well. Another thing is that learning is driven by student questions. So each storyline unfolds from students' own authentic questions about a real phenomenon. So I could say in chat to explain what's going on and why it hails somewhere, someplace, and not somewhere else. You know, I could ask questions of it, but it's not going to be drawing on the authentic questions that are on the driving question board that make it real to our classroom. And so it will never match exactly. There's going to be this mismatch that's not going to be helpful to students. So this unique path AI can't anticipate it, and it also doesn't know what my peer next to me, Michelle, told me about her experience or question about hail. AI doesn't know that question. And then it's sequenced for authentic sense making. So because units unfold like stories where things build on one another, there's the motivation for students to see what's happening next and unfolding instead of just easy button, getting to the right answers, right? They want to figure it out. They're trying to figure out what's going on and why that phenomena is happening and what's happening here. And they need to know how all the data is connected. And that drive, that authentic drive, is really powerful. The last one that you'll hear a few times is we don't have any completion-based homework built into our materials. And there's been times where teachers have felt challenged by that and wish that we had some sort of problem sets or some things that they could send home. But when we have homework going home, it's to make some sort of authentic connection between what's happening in the classroom and what's happening in their communities or in their families. And so this is connected, and the evidence of learning is connected to what's happening in the classroom. So there's no worry that they're going to go home and populate it in with AI because there's nothing for them to go home and plug into AI. So there's some benefit for us not relying on completion-based homework as a part of our method. Okay, so that was some good news. And now we get to just start diving into the concerns we all have. Tiffany, Daniel, anything that we should mention before we dive in?
Not at this time.
Just more concerns. Okay, well, let's get into our concerns. So before I even get into the concerns, I'm just going to say today, this webinar, I'm really focusing on AI use in student learning in middle and high school. And the reason I'm not even thinking about it is in elementary is because there's a lot of good reasons to skip the use of generative AI with elementary students completely. So one, there's legal issues. So if you're under 13, you need to have parental consent in order to use these tools. And most of the tools are designed to be 13 plus only. So before you think about using it, if you are an elementary teacher, you need to think about, is this allowed? Am I breaking a law? Is this going to get me in trouble? So that's one thing. And I know that middle school kind of bridges. Sixth grade is under 13, eighth grade is usually 13. So this is a little muddy in middle school, but I would say definitely elementary school. That's one reason. A second reason is safety. AI tools collect and store data, and this is not secure for young learners because they might not have a full, deep understanding of what information they should be protecting and never sharing. And so this is another reason. And the third reason is it's just developmentally not something that is good for students. They're still building their basic literacy and evidence-based reasoning, and AI outputs risk replacing sense making. So they are not in a place where they're going to be able to bring that skill of being able to analyze and critique the output in a way that is necessary for the faultiness of AI outputs. So I'll just set that there. If you're an elementary teacher and you're here because you really want to use it with your students and you disagree, then that's fine. But this is my suggestion for you to think about skipping it. Okay, so these were the 5 concerns that I had that kind of were the big buckets. What I went ahead and did so that you can come back to this later or think about sharing it or whatever you want to do with it, is I took a lot of what we're going to talk about today and put it in this document. So you're welcome to look through this document. And there's all the concern areas. And then we have defensive moves, so practices that are built into the curriculum that safeguard learning, like what's already there that's defending and protecting student learning. And then I have what are some offense things, like what are suggestions of ways that you could add new practices or build in AI readiness by doing extra. So there's the stuff that's already there that you should just be aware of and know that it's there for you. And then the stuff that you can think about building in. And then I also have the last column in that is those experts. If you're like, I really want to dive more into resources about this particular, about misinformation, here's a place where you could go to get lessons and resources about that. Okay, so we're going to jump to the bottom here and start with fairness and safety first, and then we're going to come back up to the top big three here and really spend a lot of time in here. So we'll jump right into fairness and opportunity. So the concern here is that unequal access to AI tools may widen existing opportunity gaps, especially with multilingual learners or students without home internet. So access to technology and these opportunity gaps have been there. This is just yet another thing. And AI can be so powerful that it really is a problem of equal access. So the defense, the things that are built in, the practices that are built in that safeguard learning. One is that our routines are really ensuring equitable participation, and we're not, we value every student's ideas and imperfect thinking. Right? We're decreasing the desire for the right answer. So when we decrease the need to have the right perfect answer and we value all of the answers and all the ideas students are bringing, that decreases the need or desire to go find the easy button, right? We're not worried about a polished, fancy answer. We also, as I mentioned before, we're not sending things home to complete at home. So then there's no temptation or unequal access to resources at home, right? That's nice and it just kind of built in. If you want to prepare for AI readiness, things that you could do is you could make sure that if you are going to use AI, you're going to provide access in class so that you're leveling the playing field and everyone has access to the same tools. And then these two, I would say I'm big caution here. There's a lot of interest in using things to translate and level text and things like that. And that could potentially be something that increases access, but there are a lot of problems and a lot of evidence that says it's imperfect when we're thinking about leveling text. So I would say that those two things require great human oversight and critique of products if you're going to use it. And I talked a lot more about that in the previous webinar about teacher practice. Thinking about differentiation is something that's so important and critical to these students that you need to be making sure that we're not outsourcing that to something that might do it poorly or wrong. Okay, safety, privacy, and ethics. The concern here is student data may be misused in public AI tools, and harmful or biased outputs may compromise safe and ethical learning. So this is a big concern here. One thing that's good, built-in defense, is that we follow all the rules around privacy guidelines. We do not require the use of AI, and we do not gather student data. So any simulation, anything students are using, we never ask for student logins or data or information. So we don't have any of that. When you're using our materials, you don't need to worry about student data with our materials. If you are going to use AI, one thing that would be important is to co-create some student AI norms alongside your classroom agreements. You would want to pay attention to your district policies too. This is where you want to keep yourself safe too. You can use case studies as discussion starters showing deep fakes or plagiarism or bias and talk about what's going on there. That's where it would be great to use those expert resources I had of sample lessons for that. And you can train students on what it counts to as personally identifiable information. Train them on what is that information and why they want to share it with AI. I went ahead and kind of drafted some sample AI embedded agreements that you could have. So I shared this in the folder. What happened was I went ahead and took our existing OpenSciEd norms, so respectful, equitable, committed to community, and moving our science forward. And I had us think about what would that look like if we added in limited AI integration, where AI serves as a narrow support, keeping sense making and student thinking central. Like, what would a agreement sound like there? So an idea would be, we share our own ideas first. AI may be used for small supports like spelling or re-explaining, but it doesn't replace our voice. So maybe that's an agreement, right? So we're thinking about our own ideas. These are certainly draft and they were created with AI. So I would say take the product, and if it's something that's helpful to you, you can think about that. The expanded would be like, what if you are letting students stretch their legs a little bit? You still want to make boundaries for what is too far. And so expanded would be using AI in a deeper level. So this might be something that if you're thinking about building practice, you want to make it clear for students what is acceptable and not acceptable. And it's nice to think about having this woven into your existing agreements and norms in your classroom. Okay, so those were the two of our concerns. We're now going to jump to the top three, the big guys up here, and we're going to unpack those. So the first is products of learning. So this is talking about integrity and authentic learning. And our concern here, I saw it a lot in the chat. Our concern is that students may turn in AI-generated work, making it unclear whether the work reflects their own thinking and understanding. And I liked in the chat, I saw cheating and our concern about that, but I also saw someone saying, it gives me less valuable feedback about my own teaching. I don't have a sense, I'm worried that I don't have a good sense of, are you getting it or are you just AIing it? Like, I don't know which one to do. And I think that that's a piece of it. It's like cheating's a one part of it, but the other part of it is like, the products are not reflecting the learning, and that concerns me. So the defense, like what's built into our materials to safeguard this? So one, science notebooks, super powerful, right? Science notebooks provide an ongoing evidence of thinking. If a student is using their notebook to document their thinking, there's no cheating that. Like, we're looking and we're seeing how their ideas are changing over time. What evidence did they capture from the investigation? How did their model change? Like all of the work we're doing in the science notebook is so powerful, and that is their notebook. You're in the classroom. There's no AIing that, right? It can't go to AI and say, tell me what data I was supposed to collect from my investigation today. Like, that's not going to work. So this is powerful. The driving question board is another powerful thing, right? Because that is our anchor, and it's a unique classroom specific anchor. The questions on that board are from your classroom and your students only. So it protects us from the internet, right? Those large language models are reading the entire internet, but they don't get to come read your driving question board. So whatever questions are there are really authentic to your classroom, and then we're building from those. So it's defending there. Embedded assessments too, the fact that we're doing assessments in the classroom and that they're embedded, those, and we're having to draw on evidence we have gathered through the class too. And then I mentioned it before, no homework is a value here, because when we do use homework, we're making those connections. And so it's not something that they go home and plug into AI and then we're done. Now, if you want to build this up more, and you want to add more AI readiness here, you can model transparency about appropriate AI use, like citing sources and when we disclose that we used AI. You could teach them when and how it can be used productively. You can have them critique AI outputs against their own models. So you could have them have their own data or models and then critique what AI's outputs would be. So those are some ways that you could build this up. And now I'm going to take a little tangent here, which is related but not related, but it was very much in the chat. I've thought a lot about but what about cheating? And I want to just talk a moment about cheating. And cheating's always been messy, and AI has just made it even messier. So even before AI, it wasn't always black and white what was cheating. Like if I copied my friend's homework, that was probably cheating. If we sat side by side and did it together, is that cheating? No. So like thinking about the bridge of when is it collaboration and when is it cheating was always blurry and gray. Too much parent help sharing notes. Is sharing notes cheating, or is that just good practice? So it's always been messy and unclear. And with AI, the gray areas have just multiplied. So we're going to do a tiny little thought exercise here, and we're just going to kind of think about this. So I want you to say in the chat, if you feel comfortable, I want to know, is it cheating or not? So scenario one, a student downloads the full 6.2 teacher edition, including the lesson materials, assessments, and answer keys. And the student spends their after-school hours reading through it all. Is that cheating or not? All right. If you can't see the chat, we have some yeahs, some unconvinced yeahs, some unsure, some no's. Productive cheating, is that a thing? Can cheating be productive? So it's a little unclear, right? We have what are they doing with it? Are they using it to complete their work? We'd have to have some questions of like, are they bringing in the teacher edition? What about the use for the answer keys? This one is interesting me too. We get emails like this from time to time, and I'm always impressed because I think how many of our teachers using the materials have read the whole teacher edition? Probably not many. So if this student is reading it, then like, wow, like kudos. So questionable, but there is something here of like, there's something here. So now let's think about this scenario 2. In scenario 2, a student checks out a research-based library book on energy transfer that blends science content and ideas about how people learn. They spend their after-school hours diving into the book. Is this cheating? Okay, so this one, I'm getting some no's right away. Like this feels like it's not cheating, but that's kind of what that teacher's edition is, right? It's an evidence-based book about energy transfer that blends science and science of learning. And like it's the same thing. So is it that they got it from the library or it's not the same thing? Like there's questions about that border. Okay, now scenario 3, this is our last one. A student uploads the full Unit 6.2 Teacher Edition into AI, and then it asks AI to create responses to the assessments for them that will sound like a sixth grader made them. Is this cheating? Okay, I'm seeing lots of yes. Like this feels clearer that it's potentially cheating. So I think with cheating in AI, it's a complicated reality, and like I said, it was blurry to begin with because what are we trying to get? We're trying to get at this end goal of learning. So sometimes it's not cheating, it's just that the student chose a different path to learning than you hoped they would choose. But if they got to learning, like, are we okay with that? Is that all right? So a lot of times it's not a yes or no, it depends on the process. And that the shortcuts that bypass this, they weaken learning. Like the reason that we have the sequence of learning we do is because it deepens and expands and layers on this learning in a rich way that will make learning that is not fragile. And then I think that one thing that's really important is that this unearned knowledge can hurt the community. A lot of the times when we get emails from teachers who are frustrated about a student getting the teacher's edition is because that student is being harmful to the community. They're going to the community of their peers and they're saying like, I know what happened to McKenna. Like they're ruining the experience, the learning experience for the teacher and the student, and it's disrupting the learning community. So that becomes tricky too. If you were someone that had cheating as a concern, here are some protective moves that you can do that will help with AI, but just in general. These are small things. So one is you don't need to share that you're using OpenSciEd curriculum. Like you don't have to tell them that you're teaching OpenSciEd. And you can even reformat all the slides and the handouts to be your own style instead of the OpenSciEd style. And that will prevent them from being able to be like, let me Google this OpenSciEd stuff. Right, so those are some simple things. You can change the names of people and places. You can adjust things where it makes sense. So instead of McKenna, her name could be Michelle, and you could change the story a little bit of what's going on with Michelle. And so that way people are not Googling what's wrong with McKenna. So this is something you can do, and you can reformat and customize assessments to disguise that they come from the curriculum. I think if I was in the classroom still, I probably would add some bonus questions into every assessment that had things like, what was one of the most valuable things you heard from a classmate during our last scientist circle discussion, or something, just so that it doesn't look like it's directly out of the teacher's edition, and then it's really talking about like the benefit of our classroom community. Okay, that was oh, I have these too. So because we do hear this, I wanted to just show some like prompts, you could say. Another thing you could do, instead of those hiding things of like disguising it, you could also be very transparent and say, I'm excited about this year. I have a lot of resources I'm bringing into this curriculum, including something like OpenSciEd. You might be tempted to Google it, but here's the thing: what you're going to find online isn't going to match what we're going to do, because our work is driven by your questions and the ideas we develop together. So looking up the answers isn't going to be helpful. It can also get in the way of it. So being really transparent of like, that's the point, is we're going to generate our own questions. So whatever you find isn't going to match it, being kind of honest about that. And then I gave you some prompts. If you've ever had this and they've already downloaded it, it's good to know that we make people check, I am not a student, before they download. So anytime a student has our materials, they've been dishonest about who they are, and that's good to just have as a tool. Okay. That was our section on cheating and our first concern, which was the product. And now we're going to talk about the process. And this is the one, to be honest, this is the one that I have the most concerns about. And our concern here is that students students may bypass struggle and inquiry by leaning on AI for every answer, weakening curiosity, persistence, and metacognition. So this is a big one. Like, what's going to be the effect of us leaning on and relying on AI? So we have some good things built in, some good defensive strategies. One is the investigation routines. They engage students in this hands-on collection and sense making that AI can't replicate. Students are collecting the data in the class, and they're having to make sense of the data in the class. Like, they're not going to go and rely on AI to make sense of that. They're going to have to make sense of it themselves. Same thing with the navigation routine, reflecting on progress and thinking about how things are building. They're having to make sense of that. And then the discourse, like the discourse is so valuable. It is so important and valuable. I need to listen to my classmates and hear what they're saying and see how that aligns or doesn't align. I need to ask questions. That is that hard work of learning, that if we're engaging them in that kind of meaty discourse in the classroom, they're going to be building those muscles. And then the last, back to the notebooks, like this documentation of reason steps and reflections. I'm making my thinking visible. I'm doing that hard work. If you wanted to build more into this, you could highlight the uniquely human skills like creativity, empathy, and ethical reasoning that AI is weak at. You could frame AI as a collaborator rather than a replacement, and really think about, what does that mean to be a collaborator, not a replacement, rather than a replacement. And then you could have it start engaging and arguing. This is kind of where I would say, think about what that might look like and when it might fit well. And then the big thing is have honest conversations about students, about the illusion of mastery and the need for the hard work of learning. So the illusion of mastery is a term that I learned in preparing for this, and it helps so much for me to understand what I was feeling too. So this is how AI tricks us: is AI makes text smooth and easy. It makes summaries and translations and simplifications. And this fluency feels like learning, but it skips all the hard steps that cement understanding. So students may believe that they get it when in fact they've only skimmed the surface. And this is pulled from this article here, but I'm going to show you exactly what I mean here. So I took this article. You can see this is not even all of it, but this is the article, right? So lots of pages. I didn't even take the whole thing. And then I asked AI to summarize it for me. And here's the nice summary in 3 points. And here's my big key concerns: that there's an illusion of mastery. Children may believe they understand more than they actually do if they rely too heavily on AI outputs. And then there's the equity and ethics and safety problem. I kind of believe I understand this article, and I would go around telling everybody that I understand what illusion of mastery is. I did it just yesterday at back to school night, but I don't know what's in this article. Like, I didn't learn this. I didn't read it. I didn't take time to make sense of what all these graphs are, but I think that I understand it because of that really nice summary and key concerns that AI gave me. And so if students are continually doing this, They and not just students, adults, we might forget that we actually don't know it. We actually just know the skim surface. We didn't do the deep learning. So I have a student-facing pitch that I'm going to share with you if it's helpful. I think that this is an analogy I find valuable to think about, and I plan on using it with my 11-year-old as we talk about AI. So let's pretend that not knowing is something on the first floor of a building, and knowing something is on the 20th floor of the building. So we have this big, tall building. Not knowing is on the first floor, and the 20th floor is where you're knowing. So we have some paths and decisions we need to make about how we're going to get from the first floor to the 20th floor. So one way we could do it is the staircase, and we would call this authentic learning. And on the staircase, every step is effortful, it's hard, but it's visible. You build strength, you're building muscle strength, and you're also building memory and awareness of the path. You remember where you're going and what you've seen. And if you stumble, you know exactly where you are and you can keep going. So this is the staircase. It's hard work. 20 floors, it's hard work. That's a lot of stairs. Another option is you could take the escalator. And the escalator is kind of AI as a booster to learning. And it speeds up the climb. So that's great. It's a lot easier than the stairs. It speeds it up, and you still get to kind of see and walk the path. You might miss details, and you might miss really important details because you're moving too quickly to retain your orientation. But if the power goes off and it stops moving, you can climb by foot, like they're awkward stairs, but you can climb them. And so that's AI as a booster. And then there's the elevator. So this would be full outsourcing to AI. And this feels effortless. You push a button. I push the button, I get inside and I push 20. I push two buttons, and then all of a sudden I'm up at the 20th floor. But the journey, how I got there, is completely hidden. It's literally a black box. You don't see how you got there. You don't know if you got off on the wrong floor. Like if it opened up and you stepped out and you were on the seventh floor and not the 20th floor, you would have no idea how to get up or go down. You'd be completely lost and don't know where to go. And if the power fails, you're stuck. You have no tools to move forward. You're stuck in that box. So I think when we think about your learning approach, and you can tell students to think about this too, AI can feel like an escalator or even an elevator ride. It's smooth and fast. But when you skip the climb, you don't build the muscles or the map of the path you'll need later on. So let your brain do the hard work. Just like this machine won't help you build muscle or lose weight, outsourcing all your thinking to AI won't build knowledge or brain strength. And so that would be my tiny pitch to to students and to myself, as I constantly am really leaning on the AI button. The other thing I have here, which this is connects to the other webinar that we did last week about teacher practice, is I made some considerations that might be helpful to students that mirror the ones for teachers. So if students are in a place where they can actually actively think about these questions, you could say, use AI if you can answer yes to one or more of these questions. Will it help me understand a science idea more clearly? Will it help me give me new ways to think about a problem or a question? And will it help me practice explaining my thinking? And consider if you could answer no to this. Could it replace my own sense making or keeping me from sharing my real ideas with my class? The answer is yes to D, you wouldn't use it. The problem, I think, with using this with students is I don't know if they'll understand if it helped me understand a science idea or if it took me on an elevator ride to the science idea, right? So I think that this is a tool that I think is a better use for teachers than the one that we showed last week of thinking about for teachers, is it worth you using it? Okay, the last concern we're going to dive into is quality of information. So the concern here is AI can generate convincing but inaccurate biased information, which risks reinforcing misconceptions or stereotypes. So some defensive things that are baked in to safeguard learning. One, we require evidence from classroom experiments and vetted resources. When students are making claims in our classrooms, they are drawing from evidence that they have gathered from our classroom experiences. They use discussions to challenge inaccuracies with one another. They're asking about what's going on in their models or in their claims. We're looking at one another's claims and looking if the evidence matches the claim. So those are some really great things. If you want to build more AI readiness, you can remind students AI is a confident guesser. It's guessing the next word. It's predicting and guessing the next words. So it's a confident guesser, not an authority. You can teach students to evaluate AI outputs like another data source, and I'll show you an example of what that might look like. You can practice bias spotting, thinking about whose voices or perspectives are missing, and you can position AI alongside multiple resources. So AI being one resource among others when you're thinking about gathering information. So this was when researching for this webinar, I was thinking for the teacher one, I had lots and lots of ideas about how you could productively use AI to help your teacher practice. And I was attempting to provide examples of student use. And I didn't find nearly as many of them that I didn't really find any of them that I felt like were really valuable. This was, I think, an example that I think shows how you could use it to teach vetting and source validation. I don't know if it strengthens the science learning at all. I don't think it makes it necessarily stronger, but I'm going to share it with you anyways. But I think it was a good takeaway that I spent a lot of time thinking and looking and came away rather empty-handed, that I didn't think that it had the same productive use as when we think about teacher practice. So in this one example, what I did is our unit on our our unit on floods and droughts. In this, they're looking at stories about where in the country we have lots of floods or lots of droughts happening, and we're mapping it. So one idea could be this. We could say, we've shared our community water stories. Now let's look outward. We'll use AI to quickly find examples of droughts and floods across the US, but we need to be careful. Not all information is reliable. We'll check the validity before we add it to our class map. So the idea would be that students are given this prompt formula where they're find an example of flood or drought and then they would be assigned a state, include the year, main impacts and source, tell me if this event was described as unusual or part of a new normal, and cite your sources. So this is kind of adding new information to our kind of our data points about floods and droughts. So this could be what it looks like, where this is students, they're filling out their data card of what they found. And then another process of this, which I think would be going through and validating. So there's a validity and impact check. So pairs review their response with this checklist. Who's the source? When was it published? Does this source confirm the event? So we're really getting into not only adding new data to our examples, but looking at what AI populated. And what they'll find is like a lot of the sources are totally imaginary or they're not real, or what they're talking about isn't right. And I tried this out with a few different states and found the results to be like some of the examples were from like the 80s. So that kind of got in the way of our storyline. So I think that this is potentially interesting, but also not something I would necessarily advocate unless you really want to talk about source validity in AI. Okay, I'm going to go through the chat before we dive into any of the questions in the chat. I would love for people to kind of think about, did this describe if and how your concerns have changed? Are there any concerns that we didn't address? And then any next steps or actions you plan on taking? And I'm going to go ahead and spend a little time scrolling and making sure I didn't miss anything, but go ahead and take a moment to reflect in the chat. All right. Um, I see some interest in like the idea of media literacy being like, I think that that is kind of where this is going, this media literacy. I think it's really important that students are learning that. I think I'm hoping that in ELA or other subjects that it's really a big topic that they're talking about as well. But it probably would be great for people to think about across your school community, especially in middle school and high school, like how are we attending to this and source of information and understanding that. And sounds like I don't see new concerns. I see shifted or reassuring, some reassuring of like what my gut was telling me matches with what I'm hearing here. And, I think that we are all figuring this out as we go. And so happy to be thought partners with everybody as we make sense and understand what this is going to be looking like for student learning. Um, and I'm really grateful for everybody's time today and for you joining with us today. So I think that was all that I had. I'm happy to stay on and have some conversation if anyone wants to bring anything up. But thank you so much for taking the time and thank you for all the work that you do in your roles. And I hope you have a really wonderful school year. Thomas, I see your question about differentiation. That was on last week. I spent, did you come to the teacher? Okay. Here's the spoiler alert. I said, don't do it. Basically, I think that there's so much power in what you can do to help you with all the stuff that wastes your precious teacher time. Like there's so much efficiency with planning materials, planning copying, even like rearranging or thinking about, oh, I need a block schedule versus there's like so much powerful stuff that it can do. My point last week was if it's interrupting your authentic connection with students, if it's getting in there at all, then don't do it. So I was encouraging people to not think about using it with assessment or differentiation, because those are the most important touch points that you have with students is like you need differentiation because you need supports for your unique learning needs. That's not something to be outsourced to this sketchy chat. I'm going to give that to you and I'm going to outsource the copy list that I need to, figure out for next week to chat. So that was what I was talking about. And mostly one thing that's, I think, helpful and I've thought about a lot is just the feeling that you have when you are you get a chat bot or you're on a recorded thing and how you're okay with it for a second. And then all of a sudden you're like, give me a real human. I need a real human. So I think when we're needing to differentiate, that's a student saying, I need a real human. Like my needs are so specific and I need support in order to succeed. So then I would say that there are things that you could do, but when I read the research on leveling text, and if AI is not good at that. Like it's not, you'd think it would be good at it because it's good at reading and summarizing. And then same thing translating, like it's hard to know if that translation is accurate because unless you are fluent in that language. So it's one of those things that I was in the webinar saying like, yes, we always feel like we're not doing enough in those areas, which is why it's so exciting to think about outsourcing it. But I would say it feels dangerous to me. So now you don't have to watch the other webinar. That was your clip notes. That was your AI version of it. But
Yeah,
thank
good
you.
summary. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, because
Yeah.
we have a lot of MLL learners and I know that, obviously Google Translate or some of the other tools that we've used, um, you know, does have some problems. But I also look at that AI is using for differentiation to see that they are not using it as a crutch and that they really
Yeah.
would need to get into that conversation with us. And
Yeah.
the discourse is always powerful.
And I think there are I think that it depends on what the thing is. I recently used it to pull all of our science vocabulary from all of our units and to pull and see like, oh, here's what we had in English and here's what we had in Spanish. So like in that, like I'm just doing grunt work and I'm not getting in the way of, so I think that there are things to do, but I would do it cautiously because you don't want to interrupt the learning or minimize, get in the way of it. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone again. Really appreciate it. Thanks for letting me learn with you all. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.